Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD, General Physician. All my video lectures are mainly for educative purpose. Today we are going to discuss on one of the another interesting topic, that is approach to fever. Today I am going to discuss regarding fever, which is very frequently asked in your theory and oral, particularly for fourth year student. And we are all aware that we come across fever as the most common symptom in our everyday practice. I've already uploaded one video lecture on approach to fever and common fever and management. That is mainly for the students during internship and during that private practice. But today I'm going to talk little bit regarding what are the common things which can be asked in your oral, etc., and in your theory. So it will be a little general idea regarding fever, why, what is the mechanism of fever, etc. So basically we know very well fever is a symptom. So we are going to look as a symptom and how you approach to that particular person who complains of fever. So we are going to do little bit in more detail regarding approach to fever. So fever is basically a symptom. We'll be discussing under definition, etiology, physiology, approach to fever, investigations, treatment and complications. So how you define fever? Fever is the elevation of body temperature exceeding normal daily variation. We know very well early morning temperature is little higher, sorry, it is little low, and in by evening it is higher. This is called diurnal variation. There is a set point which is set in hypothalamus. If this set point is elevated and there is elevation of body temperature due to pyrogens, maybe exogenous pyrogens or maybe endogenous pyrogens, this results into elevation of body temperature. We call that as fever. What temperature we call that as a fever? If oral or axillary body temperature more than 98.6, rectal or tympanic body temperature more than 99.8 degree Fahrenheit. But now a standard definition includes more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit by rectal or tympanic temperature. It indicates, by and large, we call that as fever. So anytime if you measure the body temperature orally, and if it is more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, rectal temperature is always 1 degree higher than oral temperature. Axillary and tympanic temperature are almost same. They are little less than oral temperature. Hence, oral temperature is a better measurement of an body temperature. So, oral should be taken as a standard landmarks. But in the person in whom you cannot take oral temperature, you can consider axillary, tympanic or rectal body temperature. A systemic, a non-specific defensive response because of infection, that is by bacteria, virus, parasites, mycobacterium, etc., or even by non-infectious causes which can elevate your body temperature, is defined as fever. There is a little variation in neonates and little variation in what we call as immunocompromised host. In neonates and immunocompromised host, if the body temperature is more than 97.5 degree Fahrenheit, then also it is considered as fever. While in all other group of people, 98.6 degree Fahrenheit, now we consider more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, 100.4 degree Fahrenheit as a fever. Now, as the fever becomes higher and higher, we call that as hypothermia. But when you use the terminology hypothermia, we'll be discussing separately an entire video lecture on that. But hypothermia means without any change in thermostat in hypothalamus, or secondary due to damage to thermoregulatory center in hypothalamus, and if there is a body temperature elevation without effect of prostaglandins, then it is labeled as hypothermia. And in a hypothermia, the body temperature goes to more than 104 degree Fahrenheit and it can be lethal. While hyperpyrexia means elevated body temperature, which can be lethal, but it is secondary due to elevation of thermoregulatory center set point and effect of pyrogens on thermoregulatory center. Then we call that as hyperpyrexia, and any body temperature elevated above normal, we call that as a pyrexia. And when it is very high, producing deleterious effects, we call that as hyperpyrexia. If you want to convert Fahrenheit into centigrade and centigrade into Fahrenheit, this is the formula. If you want in centigrade, Fahrenheit minus 32 multiply 5 by 9. And if you want to convert into Fahrenheit, Celsius temperature should be multiplied by 1.8, or we call 9 by 5, and then you add 32. Whichever way, in India we commonly use Fahrenheit, abroad very commonly they use centigrade. So we'll be talking more in Fahrenheit only. There are a lot of different types of thermometers which are available. These are chemical thermometer, these are digital, this is again a digital thermometer, this is mercury thermometer, this is tympanic, we call laser, this is again a temporal variety, this is auxiliary thermometer. There are advantages and disadvantages. I've already discussed all this in what we call as vital signs regarding temperature. So I'm just brushing it out. Most common mode of taking a temperature is oral. There are some disadvantages of taking an oral, because oral temperature will be affected very frequently by eating hot foods, hot drinks, smoking, chewing, etc. Plus, it will be difficult in a person who is having seizures, uncooperative person, children's, person who is having an oral pathophysiology like aphthous ulcer, tongue ulcers, malignancy, acute infections, all those can interfere with your oral temperature record. Rectal temperature is usually taken in a children. It is commonly not a technology for measuring a temperature, but it is the most accurate. There are some disadvantages as far as the rectal temperature is concerned. If a person is having diarrhea, proctitis, inflammatory bowel disease, Peyer's fistula, in all these conditions, perirectal abscess, perianal abscess, in all these conditions, rectal temperature will be difficult to take, as well as it will give you false interpretation. In auxiliary temperature, if you don't keep the thermometer tip properly, it will give you a false reading. Again, the person who is a thin-built individual, non-cooperative person, person with seizures, person having auxiliary pathophysiology like abscess, or cellulitis, again it can give you a false reading. Tympanic, there are certain disadvantages of this particular. If there is wax, foreign body, or if there is an otitis externa, that can interfere with your temperature record and give you a false reading. And if there is a tympanic pathophysiology like perforation, chronic otitis media also, it can interfere with your tympanic temperature record. Among the chemical thermometers which are very frequently utilized in children, non-cooperative person, again that can be affected by an external environmental temperature, so those are again not accurate. While using what we call as a digital thermometer, again those are instruments which are electronic instruments, can give you an error, as well as they are working on a battery, they can also give you a little error. You have to judge regarding all these pros and cons and then decide. Basically, fever is a protective phenomenon. Because there is an elevation of a set point, body temperature is elevated, and when body temperature is elevated, it enhances the immune mechanism. There is an increased motility and activity of the WBC, particularly T cells and B cells. There is increased production of interferon, which helps in increasing your immunity, and there is also increase in phagocytic activity. All this increases your immune functions. Hence, it is a protective phenomenon. At a higher temperature, it inhibits the growth of some of the microbial agents, and thus many microbial agent causes the infection to grow best at a normal body temperature. But when the temperature is elevated, the growth of good number of microbial agents are inhibited. So this is again a beneficial effects. So ideally, elevation of body temperature is a protective phenomenon. But at an elevated body temperature, it produces some of the effects: discomfort, headache, person has got body ache, muscle cramps, and person can have a little loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, etc. And due to this reason, you try to bring down the temperature. As well as higher the body temperature, if a person gets a severe elevation of body temperature, we call as a hyperpyrexia. It can interfere with your certain good number of all what we call as a coenzymes, hormones, and even the cell function, and can produce damage to some of the vital organs like kidney, liver, brain, heart, etc. So you have to have a nice balance between a beneficial effect and deleterious effect of elevated body temperature. If temperature is less than 95, I am going to talk in Fahrenheit only. We usually label that as a hypothermia. Normal is considered as between 98.6 to 99.6. More than 100.4 is considered as fever. And when it becomes more than 105, it is considered as a hyperpyrexia. We remember some of these figures. So in Celsius, if you consider 36 to 37.2 is considered as normal. More than 37.8 is considered as pyrexia. And when it is more than 4.1, 41.1 Celsius, or we call 104, more than 104, 105, we consider that as hyperpyrexia. And when the temperature is elevated, not due to change in the set point, where set point remains normal or set point is damaged, then that is termed as central fever or hypothermia. So we have already mentioned, you call fever, or another term is called hyperpyrexia. So you use the term pyrexia or hyperpyrexia or fever. The term hyperpyrexia means a person when the body temperature is elevated to such a level where the person starts developing deleterious effect. Usually more than 104, 105, person will start having deleterious effect. We call that as a hyperpyrexia. The another term utilized for pyrexia or fever we call febrile. And when the body temperature is normal, we call as afebrile. We already mentioned hypothermia, that body temperature is elevated above normal without any change in hypothalamic thermostatic set point. This is labeled as hypothermia. And this hypothermia is not due to pyrogens. It is because of overproduction of heat or decreased heat loss or transfer of heat from environment to a person by means of conduction or radiation, and that produces deleterious effect on the body. So body temperature is elevated not because of any change in the thermostat set point. That is termed as hypothermia. So there is a difference in hypothermia and fever. Daily body temperature swings do not occur in patient with hypothermia. So there is no diurnal variation. It rapidly rises, so can be rapidly fatal. If you give antipyretics, these antipyretics usually will block prostaglandins action on thermoregulatory center. As there is no change in thermoregulatory center in case of hypothermia, antipyretic does not give you any response. And this is the best way to suspect a person having a hypothermia. If a person who comes to with an elevated body temperature is 105, 106, you give antipyretics like paracetamol or we call acetaminophen, and in spite of giving a full therapeutic dose of antipyretics, and if the temperature does not come down, keep in mind this could be central elevation of body temperature, we call hypothermia. So in hypothermia there is unchanged setting of thermoregulatory center. It is often diagnosed on the basis of immediately preceding elevation of the core body temperature like heat exposure or drugs or what we call as anesthesia, etc. We'll be talking that entire separate lecture on a hypothermia. Very frequently, the most common condition which comes under hypothermia we call the heat stroke syndromes, where person is exposed to extreme heat like sun heat or furnace, etc. So little comparison between hypothermia we already mentioned. Hypothermia is arising a change within the body or change in the environment. So either the heat production in the body is elevated or person is exposed to the extreme heat in the environment. While fever is because of pyrogens. Pyrogen do not produce any change in hypothermia because so pyrogen is not the factor which is elevating the body temperature. In hypothermia the set point remains unchanged or there is a damage to the set point or the effector organ failure takes place. While in a case of a fever, it is because of the pyrogens which produces prostaglandins and other chemical mediators which regulates the set point. It elevates the set point and thus the body temperature is elevated. Body temperature may rise very sharply to a very high level which is lethal to the person, while here the body temperature will rise up to a certain limit and there will be a protective phenomena, what we call as a heat loss phenomena, which will try to regulate, and if treated by antipyretics, the body temperature will start coming down. And then if you treat the basic etiology, the fever will be controlled. While here in a hypothermia, you will require an external cooling measures and pyretics will not be effective in case of hypothermia. You might have to use other group of drugs like NSAID. So no antipyretics during hypothermia. Now little idea regarding a general rules in fever. Always remember, all fevers are not due to infections, because there are good number of conditions which we call as a non-infectious causes of fever, like say uh, drug-induced fever, fever due to tumors, that is carcinoma, collagen disorders, we call inflammatory conditions, autoimmune disorders, etc. Among infections, the commonest cause of fever is viral infections. Good number of non-infectious condition can produce hypothermia. By and large, the non-infectious condition are usually low-grade fever, but some of the non-infectious condition can produce a hypothermia. All fever do not require antibiotic, because they almost, we say that 90 to 95% of the group of people due to infections are viral infections where antibiotics are not effective. Viral fever in non-infectious condition, antibiotic is not effective. Central hypothermia, antipyretic is less effective. It will not lower the body temperature. The commonest cause of hyperpyrexia is usually non-infectious, like central causes, hypothalamic disorders, heat stroke, sunstroke, etc. And among infectious conditions which can elevate the body temperature, which can produce a hyperpyrexia, that is P. falciparum, enteric fever, meningitis, viral encephalitis, etc. Hypothermia is a common finding in a person who gets severe shock stage and very frequently septic shock and overdosing of antipyretics. If any person who comes to with a prolonged fever which is lasting for more than 3 to 4 weeks, always suspect tuberculosis, carcinoma, HIV infections, pyrexia of unknown origin, and again in pyrexia of unknown origin, non-infectious group. And if the person has got a rapid weight loss, think of tuberculosis, carcinoma, HIV infections. In hypothermia, the commonest causes, central causes are most common. Another group in hypothermia is CNS pathophysiology. We'll be discussing all this in detail in separate lecture. Certain drugs, particularly anesthetic drugs, narcoleptic drugs, etc. A temperature chart is absolutely necessary to find out the type of fever, and after using a proper thermometer, proper technique, the chart should be recorded, and that temperature chart will give you an idea regarding the type of fever. We will be discussing further as we pass by, and we can find out the progress, whether the person is improving or deteriorating. All fevers with rigors are not malaria. Fever with rigor can be because of UTI, enteric fever, or even a viral fever. Do not start antibiotic before a history and examinations. Antibiotics should be started only after the culture report. Use of monotherapy is always preferred over a polytherapy. Full dose for full period, that is right dose for right period, right patient at right time, is very, very important. Never give subclinical dose and for short duration of period. Look for fever if it is community acquired or nosocomial infections, because the treatment will change in a nosocomial, because it is usually a virulent organism, while community acquired will be easily controlled by a common antibiotics which are being utilized. Look for always comorbid condition, because they will interfere with your effect of antibiotics, like diabetes, HIV, anemia, certain drugs, liver pathophysiology, a chronic liver disease, CKD, etc. will interfere with your antibiotic doses, etc. and it can interfere with your effect of even antibiotics. Doses according to the weight, age, liver pathophysiology, that is chronic liver disease, CKD, pregnancy should be considered, because there are good number of drugs which will not be given during pregnancy, they are contraindicated. You will have to adjust the dose with CKD. You will have to adjust the or avoid certain drugs during CKD as well as during end-stage liver disease or chronic liver disease. And there will be good number of drugs which cannot be given in a children. Also, you will have to avoid in a person with the old age, etc. And certain antibiotic you will have to adjust the dose according to the weight, because it is milligram per kilogram per day. So all those you have to keep it in mind. Now there are certain red flags we call danger. If any person who has got a fever with this following things, I am going through that. Altered LOC, that is delirium, drowsy, stupor or coma. There is a persistent vomiting, and if there is a projectile vomiting, if there is a distension of abdomen, temperature is more than 106 degree Fahrenheit, not responding to your routine antipyretics. If person has got recent onset of oliguria, new jaundice or altered mental status, there are clinical meningeal signs like Kernig signs, Brudzinski sign or neck rigidity. Person is having tachypnea or shortness of breath or clinical signs of hypoxia in the form of cyanosis. There is a respiratory distress. Or if a person has got severe bradycardia, or person has developed a hypothermia, which is suggestive of a septic shock, or person develops severe hypotension, which is also in favor of a septic shock. A person develops purpura, bleeding spots, purpura, petechial hemorrhages, ecchymosis, or person starts developing DIC. This is again always suspect septic shock. Or person clinically starts developing a symptom signs of ARDS. These are all bad signs. We call red flag signs or danger signs, if along with fever. There is one definition which we always use in fever of unknown origin. That is, if fever is persistent for more than 3 weeks and fever is more than 101 degree Fahrenheit on several occasions, in absence of immunocompromised state and in absence of use of glucocorticoids, and even after a good physical and history and good physical examination, and you have stopped antibiotic and glucocorticoid and still the person is having fever and duration is more than 3 weeks, and you have done on a OPD ground or on indoor grounds obligatory investigations like ESR, CRP, hemoglobin, we call CBC, peripheral smear, electrolytes, protein electrophoresis, alkaline phosphatase, AST, ALT, LDH, creatine phosphokinase, ANA, RA factor, urine analysis, blood culture, urine culture, chest X-ray, abdominal ultrasound and tuberculin test. All these are included in obligatory investigations. In spite of all these investigations, still we are not able to confirm the diagnosis. We are not certain of diagnosis. We put them into FUO or PUO, fever of unknown origin or pyrexia of unknown origin. Now I am going to, I have given a little idea regarding a fever, etc. What are different terminology, all those things. Now why a person has got certain body temperature? A body has got a temperature because of there is a heat production is more than heat loss. So certain body temperature is being maintained. But this heat production and heat loss is maintained a nice balance so that optimum body temperature is being maintained. Because excessive loss will produce hypothermia, excessive production will produce pyrexia. Both are deleterious for the patient. Heat production is because of a basal metabolism which is constantly going on in each cells, and there is a production of ATP with heat. So you have got an energy production with a heat production, and that is producing elevation of body temperature and maintains your body temperature. Usually muscle activity, particularly shivering, which is a part of a protective mechanism. Thyroxine, epinephrine, all this particular will increase the basal metabolism. And again, this is as a protective phenomena. So this muscle activity as well as this will be stimulated if there is fall in body temperature or you are exposed to external environment where there is a drop in body temperature. External environmental temperature is dropped. And secondary to the temperature, you will have an effect on the cells. This is absolutely necessary. That's the reason why you have to maintain your optimum body temperature to have a normal cellular function and to have a normal function of enzymes, coenzymes, hormones, etc. and entire cell functions. If body temperature is extremely elevated, we call hyperpyrexia or hypothermia, or if there is an extreme fall in a body temperature like hypothermia, at both extremes, the cell function is affected. Normally, you will have a heat loss by means of a radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. But normally, we lose a heat by means of micturition, that is urine, by means of respiration, that is in the form of a vapor and loss by a respiratory system, and by a fecal loss, that is by a GI tract. And then maximum loss is by the skin in the form of sweating. This is the main loss. Usually we gain more heat by radiation and conduction convection rather than we lose the heat by radiation, conduction, convection. Very small amount of heat we lose, and we require a very nice balance between these two, and that should be maintained. So heat input, we have already told you, because of basal metabolism which is going on each cells, and there is a production of ATP and we call as heat, as well as heat is gained by from surrounding by conduction and radiation, and these two mechanisms, that is by conduction and radiation, is responsible for what we call as hypothermia. So whenever a person is exposed to an extreme heat, there is more heat is transferred from surrounding by means of conduction and radiation to the person, and person can develop hypothermia. And heat output loss by means of radiation conduction is less, but we lose more by skin, by lungs, by urine and fecal loss. But if we are exposed to extreme cold environment, then we can get transferred of that temperature, cold temperature, which can lower our temperature by radiation conduction, that is effect of environment, and that can produce hypothermia. Do keep this thing in mind. So in a cold condition, we want to maintain the body temperature, so we get a protective phenomena to reduce the heat loss, and for reducing the heat loss we get the vasoconstriction, which will be done by sympathetic system overactivity and release of norepinephrine, or we call noradrenaline, adrenaline. There will be reduction in the sweating, so heat loss is reduced. You will have shivering, which will increase the muscle activity, and that will increase the heat production. There will be increase in voluntary activity, that will also increase your heat production. There will be increased metabolic rate because of release of TSH, that is thyroid hormone, and adrenaline, noradrenaline. All this will try to increase the heat production, while these factors will try to reduce your heat loss, and person will also try to decrease the heat loss by wearing the clothes which will not allow the heat to be lost by means of conduction and radiation. While in a hot climate, the heat production will be reduced by decrease in the voluntary activity and decrease in the metabolic rate, by decrease in the production of a thyroid hormone and decrease in the production of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and decreasing the sympathetic activity. And increase heat loss by means of vasodilatation, increase sweating, and person will remove the clothes thus, and the person will switch on AC or fans, etc., which will help in loss of heat by means of conduction, convection, and radiation. And increased surface area will be increased by removal of the clothes, so that the more surface area is exposed to for heat loss. This will be all the mechanism by which you will try to balance in exposure to cold and in exposure to hot climates. I'll skip this particular, this is what we have discussed before, same thing is discussed here. If there is an imbalance and if there is a fall of body temperature, what happens? If there is an elevation of body temperature, what will happen? So this is because of a fall, this is because of an elevation of body temperature, we have already shown you before. This is same, that thermoreceptor in hypothalamus receives an input by signals from liver, from thermoregulatory receptors which are present in the body, and they give a sensation to the hypothalamic center. And this particular center, even there are thermoreceptors in a brain, so they will give you an idea regarding your body temperature, and that can end up with smooth muscle, vasoconstriction or vasodilatation. Sweat gland will lose, excessive sweating can be there, or sweating will be reduced. Skeletal muscle will start shivering, or there will be decreased contraction of the muscle, and there will be release of hormone or decrease in release of hormone depending upon the body temperature. So this will be the factor which will be taking part in regulation, that is peripheral blood vessel by vasoconstriction or vasodilatation, increase sweating or decrease sweating, skeletal muscle contraction, that is shivering or decrease in muscle contraction, and release of T3 hormone, T3 T4 hormone, or by release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, which will increase your metabolic rate, or decrease in the hormone release will decrease your metabolic rate. Basically, in infections, there are pyrogens, there are inflammatory mediators. These pyrogens can be exogenous or endogenous. Exogenous pyrogens are derived from bacteria, virus, fungus, parasites, etc. So they will give rise to exogenous pyrogens, and they will be acting on the thermoregulatory centers. And there will be endogenous factors like necrotic materials, injured cells, etc. will be giving rise to endogenous pyrogens. There are certain inflammatory markers like histamine, prostaglandins, kinins, platelet activating factors, cytokines, complement, etc. They will all take part in pathophysiology. So in infections, endotoxins will be taking part, while in non-infectious conditions, it will be exogenous pyrogens or exogenous chemical mediators will be taking part. While this particular can be natural or artificials, because some of the times even a drugs can produce a pyrogens like mechanisms. So during infections, there are microbial toxins which will mediate the inflammation and immune reactions. There will be microbial toxins which we call as exotoxins, These are microbial toxins which will be acting on the hypothalamus, and at the level of hypothalamus there will be prostaglandins which will be released, which will activate cyclic AMP, and that cyclic AMP will be acting on a thermoregulatory center, and it will elevate the TRC center, and this will allow the heat conservation and heat production, and that will be recorded as fever. While because of inflammatory response and immune reactions, monocytes and macrophages, which we call as endogenous products, This will release pyrogenic cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, interferons, etc. This all will circulate, which are endogenous products, and they will again similar cycle. They will be acting on a hypothalamus, prostaglandin, cyclic AMP, and elevates the thermoregulatory center, and which will finally end up with elevation of body temperature we call as a fever. So this is the mechanism, and this is the reason why this is called fever or pyrexia. When this is elevated even above the expected body temperature, we call that as a hyperpyrexia, which can be lethal for the person. And as it is lethal for the person, and here the PG prostaglandins is producing that particular stimulus. By giving antipyretics, it blocks the prostaglandins. It can help in reducing the body temperature. While in case of hyperpyrexia, this is not the factor. Hence, by giving antipyretics, it will not help in reducing the body temperature. The set point is normal or it is damaged. Hence, this antipyretic will not have any effect on the thermoregulatory center. Now, if we go through the etiology of fever, we can divide into physiological and pathological. There are some conditions where temporarily there is an elevation of body temperature because of exercise or because of stress or after a hot water bath or diurnal variation or during menstrual period, etc., which does not require any particular treatment. While there in a pathological condition, we can divide into infectious group and non-infective groups. In infectious group, we'll be showing you separately. There are some of the terms which are very commonly utilized. That is PUO, pyrexia of unknown origin, fever of unknown origin, hypothermia, heat illness, factitious fever, drug-induced fever. These are some of the terminology we'll be utilizing as far as etiology is concerned. And we divide etiology into infectious group and non-infectious group. And in infectious, we divide into infections and inflammation. Among non-infectious group, one is neoplasm. You should keep it in mind. Infection can be viral, bacterial, tubercular, malarial, parasitic, and this can involve skin, bone, muscles, respiratory system, cardiovascular, CNS, GI tract, kidney, gynec, obstetric, or endocrines involvement. Among non-infectious group, autoimmune or we call inflammation, malignancy, central fever causes heat strokes, sunstrokes, drug induced, endocrine induced, and if there is a damage to TRC center. All these are included in a non-infectious group. So we should not forget all this. And if there is a severe elevation of body temperature secondary to this, all these causes, we usually label that as hyperpyrexia. So fever can be because of infections. Few examples: typhoid fever, viral fever, leptospirosis, tuberculosis, malaria, etc. Among malignancy, leukemia, lymphoma, hepatomas, and good number of all other malignancy. Among autoimmune, RA, SLE, good number of these conditions, even inflammatory bowel disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, etc. groups, rheumatoid arthritis, rheumatic fever, vasculitis, and then we come across the fourth group we call miscellaneous, and in miscellaneous we call drug-induced fever, factitious fever, etc. Among non-infectious fever, always keep it in mind, the most common we have already mentioned before. There is a big list of non-infectious. Some of those, always keep it in mind. Do not forget drug-induced fever, very, very common. There are good number of drugs like procainamide, beta-lactamase, Isonex, quite common. And in this particular group, person will have a relative bradycardia. The febrile response will be to the drugs, and usually the person will not have a cutaneous manifestation. We have already mentioned almost good number of non-infectious group. This malignancy, autoimmune and miscellaneous becomes non-infectious group. I'll be putting some of the central groups. Heat strokes comes topmost on the list, which can be exertional or non-exertional group. Drug-induced, common classical example, cocaine or MAO inhibitors, most commonly utilized in everyday practice. There is one classical disorder called neuroleptic malignant syndrome, which is because of use of neuroleptic drugs, and in that also serotonin syndrome comes. There is a malignant hypothermia secondary to anesthetics, we call inhalant anesthetic. There are endocrinopathies. Classical example is pheochromocytoma and thyrotoxic crisis. CNS groups, that is intracranial hemorrhage, hypothalamic infarcts, hypothalamic hemorrhage, status epilepticus, CNS infection like cerebral malaria, pyogenic meningitis, viral encephalitis, etc. All these groups will be non-infectious group. All this group is a non-infectious group, and this is central causes. This is infective groups. This is the only infective groups, while all others are non-infective groups. As far as the PUO is concerned, just I am mentioning in this particular slide, you can have a classical PUO, nosocomial, HIV associated, neutropenic. And in this classical, we always get a big 3 plus what we call as unknown etiology. In big 3, infections, malignancy and collagen vascular disorders comes topmost on the list. 40% are infectious, 30% are malignancy, 20% are collagen vascular disorders. And 10%, in spite of a good investigation, still we cannot diagnose. So that is accounting for 10% of the group. Now, if we go through the different types of terminology which are being utilized, we always call infective fever, non-infective fever. This is one way of separating them into two groups. As far as the pattern is concerned, depending upon the pattern, it is extremely difficult in this era because of a self-medication. A person takes medication even before a consultation. So you do not get a classical pattern. But still, if you can demonstrate a classical pattern, there can be continuous variety, intermittent variety, remittent variety, relapsing variety, or undulent variety we'll be discussing in detail. There are some odd groups like single spike fever, Pell-Epstein fever, low-grade fever, hectic fever or septic fever, step ladder pattern, biphasic fever or camelback fever, relapsing fever, double quotidian, inverse fever, etc. I'll not be discussing all these groups because these are not common, but sometimes this can be asked to you in your oral. So just little highlight regarding those groups we'll be going through. Continuous fever is also called sustained fever. What is the meaning of continuous fever? Basically, it is an elevated body temperature above the normal. What is normal? 98.6. What is elevated body temperature? More than 100.4. So body temperature is elevated above 100.4. It does not fluctuate much. Usually we say that it does not fluctuate more than 0.5 degree or 1 degree, 0.5 degree centigrade or 1 degree Fahrenheit, but less than 2 degree Fahrenheit. And it does not touch the baseline in 24 hours. Then we call that as a continuous or sustained fever. If same variety fluctuates more than 2 degree Fahrenheit, but does not touch the baseline. Say a classical example, body temperature is elevated, more than 100.4, so it is fever. Say it is 104, it comes down to 101, again goes to 105, comes down to 103. So fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit, but does not touch the baseline in more than 24 hours. Then we call that as a remittent variety of continuous fever. But if it is fluctuating less than 2 degree Fahrenheit, Usually it is less than 1 degree Fahrenheit. We call that as continuous or sustained fever. But if it touches normal at least once in 24 hours, we call that as an intermittent fever. And depending upon when it touches normal and when is a second spike, there are different names given. So that we call as a relapsing fever. That is quartan, means every fourth day you get fever with a gap of 72 hours between the two spike. Tertian means every third day we get fever. So first day there is a fever, second day is a febrile, third day again a fever. So between the two spike there is a gap of 48 hours. And in quotidian there is a gap of 24 hours and every day there is a spike, but the fever comes back to baseline, that is less than 100.4 without any antipyretics. Then we put them into a relapsing fever, quartan, tertian or quotidian. There is also one terminology which is being utilized in a hectic fever, or some person utilize as a septic fever. If you get two spike in a day, then it is called double quotidian fever, which is good number of times quite common with abscess in a body. Also it is sometimes seen with two cycles in P. falciparum. There is another variety of fever which is being described as an undulant fever or periodic fever. A characteristic of fever of this is there is a spike of fever for few days, say 4 days to 7 days. Then person is afebrile for a gap of 7 to 10 days. Again there is a repeat episode of fever which comes at a regular interval and it remains for few days to say 4 days to 7 days, and that was described as a Pell-Epstein in a Hodgkin, so it is labeled as a Pell-Epstein. Similar type of fever you get also in a brucellosis, so it is called brucellosis or Malta fever, or it is called undulant fever or a periodic fever. These are the different terminology which are being utilized. So we have already given a description of a continuous fever. Temperature remains above normal throughout the day, does not touch the normal at any time in a day, and fluctuation is less than 5.5 degree Fahrenheit. Usually we say that less than 2 degree Fahrenheit. In a remittent fever, the fluctuation is, daily fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit, and it does not touch normal at any time in a day. Then we call that as a remittent fever. And if the fever is every 24 hours, then we call quotidian fever. Very commonly we see in a P. falciparum. Every 48 hours, classical in P. ovale and P. vivax. And every fourth day fever or every 72 hours, I have already mentioned before, that is in P. malaria. We do not see P. malaria in India. Classical example of continuous fever is viral infections like influenza, enteric fever. Usually in enteric fever we get a steady rise, we call as a step ladder pattern. It goes to the peak and then again it comes down by we call as a crisis or step ladder pattern wise. And till that it does not touch the normal. So this is a continuous fever where the fever is elevated. It remains elevated, there is no fluctuation. Here you can see it is elevated, it is rising, that's why it is called step ladder pattern or elevation of fever. While in remittent the fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit, but it does not touch the normal in 24 hours. And in a remittent variety, classically you come across in a person with an abscess like empyema, amoebic liver abscess, pelvic abscess, etc. Also in case of a central fever, you can get a continuous fever. Do keep it in mind, like stroke, heat stroke, sunstrokes, or we call hypothermia. We have given an example of intermittent fever. By and large, classical description was of quotidian, all those we have already given an example. Tertian classical example is P5X. Quartan classical example, that is every fourth day or gap of 72 hours between two spike, that is P malaria, and P falciparum is every 24 hours everyday fever, and between the two spike there is 24-hour gap, that is quotidian fever, classical in case of a P falciparum. But there are other examples of also intermittent fever, particularly quotidian fever, which you come across in case of pyogenic infections, cytomegalovirus, pseudomonas infections. In case of a gonococcal endocarditis, visceral leishmaniasis and lymphomania, you can get a double quotidian fever sometime. So double quotidian you can come across in a gonococcal endocarditis, leishmania infections, etc. As far as the relapsing fever is concerned, usually the malarial fever are described under the relapsing fever. They are variety of intermittent fever. Intermittent fever. We usually label those particular, as we have already mentioned, this different terminology. Tertian, quartan and quotidian. They are common terms which are being, or double quotidian also is being utilized. Usually P. falciparum will be a big spike. They will be usually quotidian. You can get double quotidian, while in a P5X, tertian, and in P. malariae, quartan. Undulant variety is described in a pale abstinent type of fever. There is 3 to 10 days of a febrile period and 3 to 10 days of a febrile period. Classical variety. You come across in two classical examples. When it is in a Hodgkin's, it is described as a pale abstinent type of fever. Otherwise, the common terminology utilized is undulant fever. And during the spike, it is usually a continuous or a remittent variety. And in between the two undulant spikes or relapse, there is a febrile period of 7 to 10 days, which you can get in brucellosis, and another classical example is Hodgkin's. So pale abstinent type of fever, I have already given a description. And if you want to bring down the temperature, NSAID are commonly being utilized. We already discussed this particular continuous variety, intermittent variety, remittent variety, and relapsing variety. So I am skipping over this particular slide. At your leisure time, you can go through. This is classical continuous variety. This is remittent variety. You can see it is fluctuating. Here the fluctuation is less than 2 degree Fahrenheit. Here the fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit but does not touch the baseline. When it touches the baselines once in 24 hours, we call that as an intermittent fever. And this we divide into three classical variety groups. We usually call quotidian, tertian and quartan. If in between the two spike there is a febrile period, then we usually use the word undulant fever. Again, in this we use a two common terminology. We call pale abstinent type of fever and undulant fever. Pale abstinent type is usually seen in a Hodgkin's lymphomas, while undulant variety, which is not described as a pale abstinent, it is commonly seen in the brucellosis. Very rarely we come across what is called as a biphasic fever, where you get one spike comes back to normal, again you get a continuous variety of fever. This is a biphasic spike, or also called as a camelback fever. Description given by different people. So that is the different types of fever pattern. This is continuous variety, this is a remittent variety, and this is a step ladder pattern. Step ladder pattern. This is step ladder pattern, increasing and then decreasing. Same pattern, step ladder pattern, we call fever lysis. Very classical in case of an enteric fever. You can see this is a remittent variety. Fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit. And this is intermittent fever. You can see the intermittent fever, drops by crisis. This is a relapsing fever, this is a afebrile fever, this is a fever, febrile period. Usually it will be either a continuous variety or a remittent variety. This is camelback variety of fever, biphasic or camelback variety description. This is every 24 hours gap. We call every day. We call quotidian, classical seen in a P. falciparum. This is double quotidian, again seen more common in a 2 cycles of P. falciparum, or also seen in a gonococcal endocarditis, leishmaniasis, etc. We call double quotidian fever. You get a 2 spikes and you get a double quotidian fever, classical. These 2 spikes are 24 hour, these 2 spikes are 24 hour gap. Every third day, classical in P. vivax, very rarely in P. falciparum and very rarely in P. oval. But classical, very classical, we see in India very common is P. vivax and P. oval. But by and large in falciparum you get quotidian or double quotidian fever, class quite common. This is simple tertian, this is quartan, this is malignant tertian. This is quartan variety every 4th day, but the gap of 72 hours, very commonly seen in a P. malaria, which is not commonly seen in India, very rarely in P. falciparum. Periodic fever, we have already shown you, you get either a remittent variety or a continuous variety of a febrile period followed by a febrile period, which can be a gap of 7 to 10 days, and again you get a similar spikes. This is described in a Pell-Epstein variety in case of Hodgkin's, classical. This is, you can see a typical, this is a febrile period, this is a febrile period, usually a continuous variety or a remittent variety. And if you see that in other than Hodgkin's, always suspect brucellosis, another classical group. Another way of separating out the fever is on the duration. We call acute, subacute and chronic, depending upon the grade of body temperature, low grade, moderate, high grade and hyperpyrexia. By and large this is not commonly being utilized, but still someone can utilize. We usually say that fever or hyperpyrexia. Low grade, high grade fever, hyperpyrexia. Acute fever less than 7 days, classical example malaria and viral fever. Subacute fever, typhoid fever, abscess less than 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, tuberculosis, HIV, malignancy, collagen disorders, etc. Now if you see in this, malaria and viral fever will be very high grade fever, typhoid fever will be high grade, abscess will be also high grade, while tuberculosis will be low grade, cancer will be low grade, collagen disorders, connective tissue disorders, HIV, all those will be low grade fever. So on the ground of durations, some people divide into this group also, less than 3 days, between 3 to 14 days, and more than 2 to 3 weeks, more than 3 weeks, fever of unknown origin. Whichever pattern you follow, the commonest cause as far as fever of unknown origin, we already mentioned, infection is 40%, malignancy is accounting for 30%, autoimmune group is 20%, and miscellaneous group is 10%. At your leisure time, you can go through. We already mentioned all this. Low grade fever, just close to normal, close to 101, moderate, more than 105, high grade fever, 105 with deleterious effects, we directly put them into a group, hyperpyrexia or hypothermia. By and large with fever, you get certain group of symptoms apart from elevated body temperature. Because as a protective phenomena, you starts getting shivering, or we call rigors, or you get little less than rigor, we call that as a chills. there will be associated factors which will help in loss of heat by means of increased sweating. So you can have an increased sweating, but in certain person where you want to preserve heat, there will be decrease in sweating. Along with increase in the heart rate is a common features with fever, but there are very few conditions where you have got relative bradycardia, and you will have an increase in the heart rate. So increase in the heart rate will also have little elevation of blood pressure. Good number of time fever is associated with pain because of chemical mediators which are being released. Person will complain of leg cramps, body ache, etc. So person complains of malaise, anorexia, and secondary to anorexia, nausea, vomiting. Person will have little loss of weight also. In viral fever, you will have a rash, quite common. So if any person who comes to with fever with rash, always keep it in mind, it could be viral fever, more common. Good number of time you will come across skin manifestation in SLE, collagen disorders. And as far as the common investigation is concerned, any inflammation and fever will have a active phase reactant proteins will be elevated, like C reactive protein, we call CRP. ESR will be elevated. Hepcidin will be affected. You will have a ferritin will be also elevated. That is also active phase reactant. Calcitonin will be also elevated. These are some of the active phase or acute phase reactant. Most commonly utilized is C reactive protein and ferritin. Those are the two commonly being utilized. As far as the peripheral smear is concerned, you will have a leukocytosis or leukopenia, viral fever, malaria, dengue, etc. Will have a leukopenia, while bacterial infection will have a leukocytosis. In leukocytosis, you will have a neutrophilia, while in leukopenia, you will have a neutropenia. Along with neutropenia, you can have a lymphocytosis, very frequently seen in a tuberculosis, viral infections, as well as some of the we call as sarcoidosis, etc. In allergic response, you can have a eosinophilia, etc. Any particular fever will have a certain phases we call early stage, chill, plateau, defervescence phase. At the beginning, the temperature will be close to normal. During a chill phase, along with rigors, the body temperature will sharply elevated. Then there will be a plateau for certain period of time, and then defervescence phase will start, where person will start losing heat and body temperature will start coming down. This will be along with a regulation of thermostat point or TRC center set point will be adjusted, and that will be adjusted in case of a infective pathophysiology. So here the set point will be elevated, so body temperature will be elevated up to that level, and then it will come down because of the protective, what we call as a vasodilatation. While during elevation of body temperature, you will have a vasoconstriction. This period is usually beginning of the temperature. This is febrile period, and this is convalescent period, which can be seen in by and large. So during effervescent period, heat production is more than heat loss. Now, a persistent febrile period, both are equal. heat production and heat loss is almost equal, so it is maintained, and this is maintained because of the set point is being elevated, and in defervescent period now heat loss becomes more than heat production, hence there will be loss of heat. If the temperature is elevated above 104, 105, at that particular level now you will start getting changes in central nervous system, cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, immune system, as well as metabolism, and this will start producing effect on body. Also in a metabolism you will have an effect on sugar, lipids, protein, water, salt metabolism, and even vitamins. You will have an effect on wide variety of system, right from central nervous system, cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, immune system, blood sugar level, lipid level, protein level, even water balance, electrolytes, all those. This is in short. If the person body temperature is normal, usually we don't get any symptoms. As the temperature comes to 100.4, person will have a sweating, person will start losing heat, he will be discomfortable, and person will also have little hungerness. As the temperature rises, shivering will further increase, sweating will increase, body will be flushed, there will be tachycardia, tachypnea. At 104, person will start having little dizziness, dehydration, weakness, vomiting, headache, person will have a confusion, hallucination, delirium, drowsiness, and when it increases very high to 106, 104, 106, 107, etc., the person becomes unconscious, and then person can even have mortality, we call death. So above 105, we start getting a stage we call as a hyperpyrexia or hypothermia, depending upon the etiology, and it can be lethal. This is just I'm brushing out because we'll be having a separate lecture on this particular what we call as heat strokes, that is heat illness. You can divide into heat cramps, heat syncope, heat exhaustion, or heat strokes. At present I'm not going into detail regarding this particular, we are going to discuss separately in a separate lecture. So hyperpyrexia, the most common cause is heat stroke. Another cause of hyperpyrexia is a malignant hyperthermia, which is very frequently secondary due to succinylcholine used during anesthesia, and it is a hereditary disorders. Person are very sensitive to succinylcholine, and during that particular induction of anesthesia they develop a severe muscle spasm, severe muscle rigidity, and body temperature is elevated. They get even masseter spasm. This is classical description we call as a malignant hypothermia. Secondary due to neuroleptic drugs, if the person say to haloperidol or lithium groups of drugs, they develop an elevated body temperature we call as a neuroleptic malignant syndrome. This is again a rare conditions. Very frequently the person who is on antipsychotic drugs, they are more prone to. So if a person says that he has psychiatric disorders, he is on certain group of drug, and if he gets an elevated body temperature, we put them into neuroleptic malignant syndrome. We'll be discussing in detail. And there is one more group we call as a factitious fever, which is rare, which we don't come across commonly, but once in a while you do come across. There is another group we call as a serotonin syndrome. We'll be discussing all those separately. So in general, whenever a person comes to you with fever, you have to examine, you have to get a good history, including history, physical examination, that is social history, family history, past medical history, all those, and you have to examine CNS, ENT, heart, lung, GI tract, genitourinary, musculoskeletal, liver, etc. Depending upon the complaint and clinical suspicion, which system is involved, accordingly you will be examining that particular group. And then we go for a specific investigation to find out the etiology. There is one pattern which some person follows, we call as OCTRA. OCTRA means ask regarding origin, that is onset, and duration. C is for classification of fever, means you try to find out whether which type of fever it is. T for timing, which timings of the day, and so timing and classification will help you to find out the type of fever. And then R is for relieving factors. So that is being utilized whether what type of it is with antipyretics or it is spontaneous. And then A is for associated features. Whichever form you want to go, you can go through. I usually follow this: onset and duration, severity, whether it is associated with chills or rigor, types, very difficult because of self medications, over the counter, etc., and immediately what we call as antibiotics are given, or we call as empirical treatment is started. So classical types are not been seen. Associated features helps you a lot to come to the system being involved. So associated symptoms and signs should be taken properly. So it gives you a good idea whether urinary tract, respiratory system, GI tract, CNS, what is being involved, liver, kidney, what is being involved, accordingly you will be. So there are few symptoms like sweating, myalgia, rash, odynophagia, altered mental status, chills and rigors. This is little bit in detail. At your leisure time you can go through what will be related to the sweating, etc. What are the examples? What will be the example in myalgia? What will be the example in chills and rigors, altered mental status, etc. What are the different conditions? You can go through your leisure time. We already mentioned the red flag signs. There will be good number of red flag signs in this group also. And these are all the pictures showing you different clinical findings in eye, oral cavity, pulse, blood pressure, hands, skin, general observations, head and neck, neurological examination, chest, heart, abdomen, genitourinary tracts, etc. At your leisure time you can go through, otherwise it is very exhaustive. So I'm skipping over. You can pause this slide and go through that at your leisure time. This is one slide which I found to be useful, so I put this slide. Always with fever there is a tachycardia. So fever with relative tachycardia very commonly will be seen in a person with a gas gangrene and non-infectious causes. But relative bradycardia is very common, and that is given a name Fagett signs. So it can be asked to you in your oral. And classically we see in an untreated typhoid fever. There will be other conditions like rickettsia, leishmania, brucellosis, yellow fever, etc. In a hospitalized patient, particularly drug fever and Legionnaire's disease. These are some of the conditions where you can come across, we call as a relative bradycardia, and it is labeled as a Fagett signs. Classical example, always keep it in mind, untreated enteric fever. There are some of the conditions which can be secondary due to malignancy. Usually they are low grade fever, comes very frequently in a PUO. And one important way to differentiate from an infectious fever is they will respond very nicely to naproxen. So if naproxen is given, fever due to cancer will decline very rapidly. But if paracetamol is utilized, it may not respond. So naproxen test is sometime being utilized to find out probability of a cancer fever and to distinguish from infectious fever. And this is one of the mechanism which you can utilize in a PUO. But it is not useful for differentiating neoplastic with connective tissue disorders, which is again a variety of a non-infectious group. I'm just showing you some of the slides. If fever is with rash, you can come across in rubella, scarlet fever, chickenpox, measles, These are all viral fever. This is only fever we call typhoid fever, where you come across a rose spot, very, very uncommon. You can demonstrate only in a fair person, and it is very commonly seen over the abdomen. So do keep it in mind. You can have certain oral cavity findings like Koplik spots, very frequently seen in a measles. There are called Forchmere spots in case of a rubella, again seen in an oral cavity. We call enthalema, enanthema, that is inside. When you see over the skin, we call exanthema. These are all seen in measles, dengue. You can see a rash, typical rash in measles, dengue. You will see a parotid gland enlargement and glandular enlargement in the submandibular glands. In chickenpox, you can see a vesicular eruptions. You can see a purpuric spots. In case of a dengue, you can see a rash, or sometimes you can see a purpuric spots also, very commonly seen. In secondary syphilis, you can see a typical rash. Also, you can see a typical rash and patches over the tongue in secondary syphilis. These are typical chickenpox vesicles which can be seen. These are purpuric spots which can be seen in certain disorders. These are chickenpox pustules. You can see typical, this is in herpes zoster. When you get over the supraorbital nerve, it is also described as herpes zoster ophthalmicus. These are severe ecchymosis, very classically seen very frequently in a DIC, and septic shock. In meningococcemia, you can see a typical skin eruptions, papular eruptions, typical. Even sometimes you can get extensive hemorrhages also. In scrub typhus, you can get Exar. These are typical Exar. Erythema multiforme in a drugs reactions, very frequently seen in a sulfa, etc. What investigation you go for? We have already mentioned in a routine investigation, HB, TCDC, a peripheral smear for malarial parasites, Vidal test, urine analysis, because these are the most common infections seen in India. Sputum examination and stool examination, if a person has got respiratory system involvement, then sputum examination. GI tract involvement, stool examination. We call acute phase reactant markers, CRP, procalcitonin, ESR, and ferritin. Routinely not being done, but nowadays in a COVID, these are the common biomarkers which are being, we'll say, acute phase reactant, commonly being done. If you want to confirm the diagnosis, early blood culture, which can be arterial or venous blood culture, can be done to identify the bacterial infection or even a viral infections. Also, if a person has undergone some procedures, you can get sample from catheter tubes. If there is a discharge from wounds, etc., you can send it for a culture. In a suspected etiology, specific etiology, in a respiratory, you can go for X-ray chest PA view. In abdominal pathophysiology, ultrasound. In certain conditions which cannot be diagnosed by ultrasound or chest X-ray PA view, you can go for MRI or CT scan or PET MRI. In suspected CNS infection, CSF examination. And biopsy can be done in a suspected case of, usually they are being required in a malignancy. T34 TSH is useful to rule out thyroid disorder resulting into elevated body temperature like thyrotoxicosis. Liver function test and renal function test are done to find out the liver pathophysiology as well as renal pathophysiology. And also in case of a hyperpyrexia, there can be liver function can be abnormal, renal parameter can be abnormal. Brain MRI can be done also in case of a hyperpyrexia, hypothermia, particularly in case of a hypothermia to rule out the brain damage and central causes for central hypothermia. This is a chart which is very frequently a very simple chart where if a person gets a localizing sign, you go for a specific, say pulmonary. These are pulmonary findings. These are abdominal findings. These are urinary symptoms. These are cardiac. These are CNS. These are device related, etc. And if a person gets a classical localizing sign, it becomes very easy. But if a person has got no localizing sign, then a good history, good examination should be repeated again. In case of a person is on some medications, always rule out a drug fever. If a person has got loss of appetite, loss of weight, look for HIV infections, tuberculosis, etc. or immunocompromised host. And if fever is more than 3 weeks, keep it in mind it could be FUO. And again in FUO we have told you, infection comes 40%, malignancy 30%, collagen disorders are 20%, and in spite of a good investigation still there may be 10% which will be undiagnosed. I am keeping this slide at your leisure time, you can go through it. Is a very good slide. To discuss all this, it is extremely difficult. So for ruling out CNS, CT brain or MRI brain, for abdominal pathophysiology, CT or MRI abdomen, and in case of a chest, CT abdomen and X-ray chest PA view. In a case of suspected bone pathophysiology, you can go for a X-ray of bones, and in suspected tuberculosis, you can go for even a skin test we call as a Montauk's test. Management in general for any febrile person, adequate IV fluids or oral fluids. If a person is not taking adequately, IV fluids should be given. If person is able to take orally, adequate fluids, electrolytes, nutrition should be maintained. Best is oral rather than IV. If a person is not taking orally because of loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, etc., then only it should be given IV. Antipyretics, analgesic may be utilized to reduce body fever and to make a person comfortable. Bed rest is good. Personal hygiene, prevention of what we call as a contagious disease, particularly like viral fever like measles, mumps, then COVID, all those you need an isolation and prevent the spread of infections. A good history, good physical examination, and then followed by investigation depending upon the suspected etiology, and try to come to the nearmost diagnosis, and then treatment will depend upon the specific etiology. With specific etiology treatment, always look for complications. Complication may be because of a basic etiology and also because of the treatment itself also. You have to keep all this thing in mind. I am skipping over this slide because this will be discussing in a person with a hypothermia. That is, if any person who comes to a hypothermia, what you do in a heat cramps, heat exhaustions, heat strokes, etc. There are certain common complications which you will come across with a hypothermia or hyperpyrexia. That is ARDS, DIC, renal and hepatic damage, and person can go into renal failure, AKI, or acute liver failure also. Hypoglycemia, rhabdomyolysis, and rhabdomyolysis can produce AKI because of myoglobinuria, and person can also develop seizures, and secondary to seizures you can have rhabdomyolysis, electrolyte imbalance, etc., and even a hypoxic damage to brain. Secondary to hyperpyrexia, hypothermia, you can develop lot number of complications, any one of these complications. Person can go into a shock state because of dehydration and also may be associated with electrolyte imbalance. Person can also develop a hypothermia because of septic shock, or because of severe peripheral shock, or because of treatment for hyperpyrexia or hypothermia. Person can develop a treatment complication secondary to basic etiology, or complication because of a treatment, that is because of drugs, etc. All these things should be kept in mind. So I end my lecture here. I've tried to cover up majority of the things related to the everyday fever what you come across. In detail we have done regarding a treatment part in a separate lecture which I have already uploaded before, that is treatment of common fever. I have not covered hypothermia in this particular group. We'll be discussing separately. So I end my lecture here. Thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable and I appreciate that for spending some of the time with me. I hope this lecture will be very helpful to you. If you find this lecture is interesting and helpful to you, please press button like, subscribe and do share with your friends.